What is good, everybody? Welcome back to another episode brought to you by the League FFB. It is Friday. It is almost time for the weekend. We've obviously already seen the Thursday night football game. We got a Friday night game tonight, but I want to give you guys some start sits this weekend that you should be playing and you should be avoiding at the running back and wide receiver positions. So I got 8 guys to talk about in today's video. That's exactly what we're going to do. Let's not waste any more time. Let's hop right into today's video and let's start talking about these must start and must sit players. All right, so we're going to be starting with the starts of the week. 2 running backs, 2 wide receivers. We'll start at the wide receiver position. The first player I want to talk about is going to be Kupp of the Los Angeles Rams. And this Rams and Lions game is projected to be the highest scoring matchup of the weekend with a projected game total of about 51 points. And the Lions are favored in this matchup, meaning that the Los Angeles Rams will likely have to play keep up in this game with the Lions, and they will be passing the football a lot in this matchup. Now, we have already seen proof that both Kupp and Puka Nacua can be productive together when they are both healthy and when they are both on the field, so we shouldn't really worry too much about either of these guys hurting the upside of the other. Now, in the back half of the season last year, once Kupp was fully recovered from his hamstring and ankle injuries, we did see him post multiple games with double-digit targets and multiple weeks of wide receiver 2 or better numbers. With Puka Nacua missing the last few weeks of preseason action due to an injury of his own, I wouldn't be surprised to see the Rams lean on Kupp a little bit more than normal here in this week 1 matchup, and although we do expect this Lions defense to be very good this year, they're still quite young in the secondary and they will be playing a couple of rookies at cornerback, and it could take a few weeks for these guys to really mesh. So with that being said, I am comfortable throwing Kupp into my lineups this week as a low-end wide receiver 1, maybe a high-end wide receiver 2 play, as I currently have him as the wide receiver 13 in my weekly wide receiver rankings. Now, the second wide receiver that you should be starting this week is going to be Stefon Diggs of the Houston Texans. And this Houston Texans offense brought in Stefon Diggs over from the Buffalo Bills to be a contributor in this offense as a complementary piece to outside wide receiver Nico Collins. And in this week 1 game, they do get a good matchup here against the Indianapolis Colts. This game is projected to be one of the higher scoring games of the weekend, and both of these teams play very fast-paced football, so I do think we can expect a lot of points for our fantasy football rosters. With Stefon Diggs' recent comments earlier this week about not forgetting how to play football, you kind of get this sense of him wanting to prove some of the doubters wrong, and the Texans did vote for Stefon Diggs as a team captain. Now, even though that's not really anything we should be reading too much into, it does kind of show you that there is a mission to make this work with Stefon Diggs here in Houston. Now, as far as the matchup goes, the only real threat to worry about in this cornerback room is going to be Kenny Moore, and lucky for Diggs, Moore is mainly just a slot corner, and in those 3 wide receiver sets for Houston, I do expect Tank Dell to take the slot role, so he will see the majority of Kenny Moore in those slot situations. Now, we should expect Houston and Bobby Slowick, the offensive coordinator there, to scheme up some of these plays for Diggs early on just to get him involved early in this game, and in a PPR league, Diggs can rack up some points fairly quickly. I would be very comfortable throwing Diggs into my lineup this week as a safe floor wide receiver 2, but if Stefon does find his way into the end zone here this week, I think this is a guy who could be a top 15 type of play at the wide receiver position. Now let's move on to these must-start running backs. The first running back we'll talk about is going to be James Conner of the Arizona Cardinals, and the Arizona Cardinals are going to be on the road this weekend in Buffalo in a game against the Buffalo Bills, but I do think that this game is flying under the radar simply because it's not in a primetime slot. Now, Vegas is projecting a lot of points in this matchup, and all offseason long, the Arizona Cardinals, and more specifically the head coach and the offensive coordinator of this team, have talked about how James Conner is going to be a bell cow and how he is going to be a key part of this offense and how they want to make the run game a part of their identity here in 2024. Now, obviously, there's going to be a lot of eyes on Marvin Harrison Jr., but James Conner is going to be in for a big day here in week 1. We've seen just how much more productive he can be when Kyler Murray is on the field and just how much easier it does make this run game when James Conner and Kyler Murray are both healthy. Now, Buffalo was middle of the pack last year as a run defense, and on the defensive line, they are going to be running out pretty much the same group as they did last year with maybe some change to the linebacker room and secondary. So that being said, I do expect James Conner to get the bulk of the carries here in week 1 against the Bills, with rookie Trey Benson really only being a complementary piece here in this offense. And I do believe there is a high possibility that James Conner finds his way into the end zone this week. I took that line over on Underdog Fantasy, so I put my money where my mouth is there. So because of that, I think we can confidently throw James James Conner in our lineups as a running back 2 with some upside here this week. Now, the other running back I think you should try and find a way to put them in your lineup is going to be David Montgomery of the Detroit Lions. And the process behind this David Montgomery start is actually a fairly similar argument to the one that we made for Cooper Kupp. As I mentioned, this game is projected to be the highest scoring matchup of the weekend. And with the projected game total being 51 points and the Lions being favored, that does mean that Detroit may have some opportunities here to establish the run and try and control the pace of play here in this matchup. Now, this backfield and this offensive line is one of the best in the league, and this run game is efficient enough that both Jahmyr Gibbs and David Montgomery can eat. And as we saw last season, David Montgomery is going to have plenty of goal line carries in this offense. He's probably a good bet to fall into the end zone this weekend. And another similarity to the Kupp situation is the fact that Jahmyr Gibbs, just like Puka Nacua, missed some time in the preseason due to an injury. So if the Lions do decide to take things a little bit slower with Jahmyr Gibbs and give him a little bit of a lighter workload here in week 1, simply because they do have another great running back on this offense here in this backfield, I do think that that could mean an even higher ceiling for David Montgomery here this week. Plus, not to mention the Rams are also going to be trying to figure out who is going to step up on the interior defensive line now that Aaron Donald has retired, and they're going to be leaning on some rookies as well in guys like Braden Fisk and Jared Verse, both out of Florida State, to help kind of shore up this run defense. So if I were to put a little bit of a range of outcomes on David Montgomery this week, I think he's going to finish somewhere between top 10 and top 20, kind of giving you this high-end running back 2, low-end running back 1 type of feel if he does find the end zone in this matchup, which I think he is a good bet to fall into the end zone. But now that we've talked about the players that you should be starting, let's talk about some players that you should be avoiding because they have risky matchups or just the situation in general is risky for these guys. We'll start at the running back position on this one. I want to talk about Rhamondre Stevenson for the New England Patriots. In this game, it's projected to be one of the largest point spreads of the weekend, with the Bengals heavily favored in this matchup, meaning that it could be a very negative game script for Rhamondre Stevenson here, and the Patriots could abandon the run here in the second half. Now, that's not even to mention that this New England offensive line is really bad, and like I said, this is a game where they're going to be trying to play catch up, so it doesn't necessarily give you a lot of confidence that they're going to be able to lean on their run game. Now, even though Rhamondre Stevenson is a solid pass catcher, the addition of Antonio Gibson in this offense does worry me. I'm a little bit worried that he's going to take away some of that receiving role, and if they are playing catch-up, you may not get as many catches from Rhamondre Stevenson as you have in years past because they actually have another running back there that can catch passes. Now, there obviously is a chance that Rhamondre Stevenson can save his day if he scores an early touchdown before they are down too much, or even if he gets one in garbage time, but I'm worried that without finding the end zone here in this matchup, he probably isn't going to have any upside for us in fantasy football. Now, he's a player that I think if you have to play him, we're probably looking at a guy who can give you running back 3 numbers, and that's all I'm viewing him as this week. But I'm sure that just being week 1, you're probably not dealing with a lot of injuries. So assuming you have the depth, you probably have some better options to play here this weekend. Now, the other running back I want to talk about is going to be Aaron Jones of my Minnesota Vikings. Now, obviously, Aaron Jones, he was brought over from the Green Bay Packers to be the lead running back in this Minnesota offense this offseason. And the matchup here against the Giants, it kind of just feels average at best. Now, this isn't really me necessarily knocking the talent of Aaron Jones, but this is just a risky situation all around. This should be a game that is competitive throughout the game, so that does mean that Jones likely won't get game scripted out. But the best part of this Giants defense is the defensive line with Dexter Lawrence and Brian Burns, meaning it could be a little bit tougher for Jones to find some of these consistent runs. Now, there are obviously still some concerns about this Vikings offense as well, with Sam Darnold under center, meaning it's going to be pretty hard to project just how many red zone opportunities the Vikings are going to get this week until we actually get to see how this offense is going to run under Sam Darnold. Now, obviously, there's a chance that Aaron Jones breaks off a big play or he catches enough footballs out of the backfield in a PPR league that he can salvage his day and give you good enough production here in your lineups. But just like Rhamondre Stevenson, I think without a touchdown, he has very minimal upside here in week 1. So I'm projecting Aaron Jones to be more of a very low-end running back 2 in this week's matchup. I probably have him just a few spots above Rhamondre Stevenson, so he's just a little bit of a better play than Rhamondre. But if you had guys like Raheem Mostert, James Conner, David Montgomery, DeAndre Swift, Najee Harris, Alvin Kamara, I think all of those guys might have a little bit more upside than a guy like Aaron Jones. And now looking at some of these riskier plays at the wide receiver position, one guy I'm avoiding is going to be Chris Godwin of the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Chris Godwin, he struggled in this offense for a while now. He only posted wide receiver 2 or better numbers in about 23.5% of his games last year with Baker Mayfield playing the quarterback. And now we go into week 1 of this season, and there's a few more negative variables variables that I think need to be added to this mix as well. You have some added target competition from Jalen McMillan and an offensive coordinator change here in Tampa, so it's hard for me to have any type of confidence when I'm throwing Chris Godwin out here in week 1 against the Washington Commanders, even if it does seem like it's going to be a decent matchup on paper. Now that said, the Bucs are going to be at home and they are favored to win in this matchup, so I'm not necessarily projecting this to be a matchup where the Bucs have to do too much on offense in the passing game, other than maybe get an early lead and then grind the clock out with their run game and Rachaad White. Now we know that Baker Mayfield is going to look at Mike Evans as the first read in this offense the same way he did all year last year, and we know that Rachaad White is going to be heavily involved, so despite the Godwin bounce back year rumors, this is more so of a player that I want to wait and see before I'm just willingly throwing him in my fantasy football lineups. Now the good news is you probably didn't draft him very high in your fantasy football draft, so you probably have some other options that you can play here this week. I currently have him as my wide receiver 34 on the week, and more so a guy that only is a flex play if I need him. And now the last and final player we should avoid is going to be Diontae Johnson for the Carolina Panthers. This matchup between the Carolina Panthers and the New Orleans Saints is going to be in the running for probably the most boring, the lowest scoring matchup of the weekend. There's not a lot to like here in this matchup. And even looking at it, there really aren't many fantasy football options that you're going to be eager to play on it either, and even less of those options from this game will be on the Carolina Panthers. New Orleans was all right against wide receivers last year, only allowing about 24.8 fantasy points per game to the position as a whole, but we know this Panthers offense is still going to be a work in progress, and we also know that the best part of the Saints secondary is Marshawn Lattimore. Now, at the time of this recording, Lattimore is questionable in this matchup, but it does feel like he will be trending towards playing by Sunday, and that's not necessarily going to be good for Diontae Johnson, who will likely be shadowed by Lattimore for the majority of this game. Now, if you go over to Underdog Fantasy, they currently have Diontae projected at 8.65 fantasy points. Obviously not what you're looking for if you're going to throw him into your lineup, and his receiving yardage play is at 53.5. So unless you think he's going to be peppered with enough short area targets to make up for the lack of efficiency or the big playability in this matchup, he's probably a guy that you should look towards avoiding here this weekend. I kind of have Diontae Johnson as a low floor, low ceiling type of flex play this week, and although I do think that there will be better days ahead for Diontae Johnson, it's just not going to be here in week 1 against the Saints and against Marshawn Lattimore. So there you have it, 4 players you should be trying to start in your fantasy football leagues this week, and 4 players you should be avoiding. If you guys like this video, go ahead and hit the like button. It is the best free way to show this channel some support. If you missed it earlier in the week, we did our running back and wide receiver rankings, top 36 at each position. If you have any questions for me, start sits, trades, whatever you got, drop them in the comments below. And while you're down there, hit the subscribe button for me. Want to try and get to 3,000 subscribers here very quickly. We can do that with your help, helping you guys all year long with your fantasy football teams. And hit that like button for me. It is the best free way to show this channel some support. Now, with all of that being said, I have nothing else for you guys today, so I will see you on our next video. But until then, peace out.